So I bring up all that to bring up the fact you have to realize that it doesn't until that offensive line gets out there. Um, and the Eagles are going to have a very good offensive line. It's a matter of how good.
Welcome in, everybody. A Monday edition of Birds 365. The first off-season work, or I guess the middle of off-season work, is officially behind us, and the Birds are in the lull period. The first really one of the off-season now after the draft, waiting on official training camp. Johnny Mac, how was your weekend, man?
It was good. Yeah, a little bit of a respite, chance to breathe a little bit after a big mini camp week, and now it's yeah,
You
the
guys
grind
ramped up
doesn't
quick.
stop for us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you guys ramped up quick last week. It was like an in-season week last week with you guys going down to NovaCare every day and stuff like that.
Yeah. First mini camp, obviously, in the Nick Sirianni era, which we talked a lot about. And yeah, it's a lot more fun when there's a mini camp. There's a bunch of mini camps going around the NFL. This will be the last week. Most teams are having their mini camps this week around the league, so you're going to see some information coming out of other teams. But the Eagles are done for the spring, and they'll pick up in training camp, which will be late July, probably a week earlier this week. Not official, but most likely a week earlier because they have the early start, September 6th against Green Bay in Brazil. So I project it to be a little bit earlier than normal, July 27th, 28th. So you'd probably kick it back a week.
Yep. So there you go. Late July is when we'll see the Eagles again. So we got about a 6 to 7 week period here where the Eagles won't be on. They'll be away. And as Jalen Hurts said, he'll be doing non-football stuff. Wouldn't tell us what that would be, but they will be doing their non-football stuff.
Non-football stuff.
Yeah, getting away from the game. So we got a good show planned. We got Jeff Kerr coming up at 8:20, so about 15 minutes from now. Johnny Mac and I will recap what went on last week and a little bit just put our final touches on what Johnny Mac took away from the mini camp, and then I have I do want to get into the Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni topic, just because everybody's been talking a lot about this, the comments that Jalen made regarding Nick Sirianni. So we will talk about that a little bit in hour number 2 after Jeff Kerr. But John, let's get into the Eagle news. On Friday when the show broke, after the Eagles signed another cornerback, another defensive back, Perry Nickerson. You kind of predicted that on the show that he was having a good mini camp. He was talking to Nick Sirianni a little bit. What do you make of Perry, and what did you see from him down at minicamp?
Yeah, veteran guy. He's played a little bit, bounced around, obviously a journeyman. It was interesting from the start that he got a lot of reps at slot cornerback with the third team, which, the Eagles have plenty of bodies at this time of year. So it was notable how quickly they threw him in the mix, despite the fact that he was a tryout player and he performed well. So no surprise you want to reward guys like that. The Eagles had a couple open spots, but it is interesting simply because they have so many cornerbacks.
It's the one spot we've been like, they're so deep, and they
have 14, and you can argue they have more than that because we're putting people like Mekhi Gardner at safety, who's really a cornerback moving to safety. So they have so many defensive backs. Yeah, it's obviously a long shot that he makes the team, but wouldn't shock me if he was one of those veteran practice squad guys because he's an NFL player. We talk about the Eagles have so many NFL players at cornerback. They're going to have to cut some guys that belong in the league, so to speak. Not saying top tier, not saying they should play, and this is one of them. This guy's been around. He's played for a bunch of different teams. Played for Vic Fangio last year in Miami.
So
that's part
I saw
of it.
that. Finally, a Miami Dolphin player who's okay with Vic Fangio.
Yeah, that's part of it as well. So I think there's a lot of Miami players that were fine with Vic
I know,
Fangio.
but
It's basically the defensive backs who like to play press coverage. That's who doesn't like Vic Fangio. And Jalen Ramsey being the most notable. Jalen Ramsey's going to the Hall of Fame one day. And he might be the best press corner of his generation, and he didn't like it. So what? People got to move on from that.
Yeah,
It's
I'm not really.
understandable why he didn't like it, and it's understandable why other people do like it. And
Yep,
that's just the way it's always going to be.
agreed. Johnny Mac, I have 3 takeaways, and we'll just do this real quick, a little bit of a recap. But before I do that, let me welcome everybody in this morning. Jeff Martin, what's going on, man? B Mo, CZ, Twiz, James Carver, Little G Griffith. I don't see SMD Eagles, but I do see all of our other guys. So Eagles, Lee Butcher. What's going on, Screwface? What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Birds
Screwface.
365. We got some funny names in the chat, but hey, look, I read them what they are. Sometimes I get caught off guard by some of the names, but we appreciate you all being here. If you guys like the show, make sure you drop a like on the show. We do appreciate your guys' presence each and every single day. John, I'm going to recap. I want to give you 3 recaps I took away from our shows last week from the Eagles being on the field. One of them, the first one, is the defense has a chance to be better than we expected. I'm not saying they're going to be, but from what they've shown so far, they have a chance to be better than we expected. On the contrary, the offense has a chance to be worse than we're expecting. I don't think they're going to be also, but I will say they have a chance to be worse depending on how it plays out. And then the third thing I'll take away is that I am concerned about the head coach of the football team. I'm not concerned about much on this football team. I am concerned about the head coach. Those were my 3 takeaways from the Eagles minicamp. I know you wrote a little bit about the offense, about the offensive line. If you could give me a couple takeaways, you don't have to give me 3 or anything, but just a couple takeaways that you had, and you can also dive into the offense and what you wrote about them. I know a lot of people made a big stink about them kind of stinking up minicamp, and it doesn't mean much.
Yeah, and I'm in that category but maybe the difference is I try it as best as possible to put all the context out there, and I keep and it affects both sides of the ball. So this is the major one from my perspective, and this is the most important one. And I go back. I really like Bobby King a lot, the new linebackers coach, because he's no nonsense. You can tell he's just not care what people think kind of guy. I
Yeah.
respect that. And he, said we're in pajamas, which I love. I love that quote. And it's on both sides of the ball. So if you take it from the aspect, I say it all the time. People get caught up in skill position players. I get it. I understand it. Those are the headliners. That's what everybody wants. That's what everybody likes. And those are the guys that are working the most in spring, or at least working the most when it's valuable. Where the offensive line and defensive front, running back, linebackers, when it's not involving pass coverage as well, or the passing game as well, it's not as valuable for them. Spring work, you're not allowed to do things. Obviously, you don't have pads on, so the physicality is ramped way down. And generally, they're not even on the field, the offensive lineman, defensive front. And when they are on the field, you heard a lot about Bryce Huff dropping into coverage or Nolan Smith dropping into coverage. That's what they're practicing. They're practicing coverage, being a flat defender. They're not practicing pass rushing other than the individual drills, the technique work, which is important, but that's sort of hard to gauge, obviously, from other than the guys working them, like Jeff Stoutland, Jeremiah Washburn, etc. So I bring up all that to bring up the fact you have to realize that it doesn't until that offensive line gets out there. And the Eagles are going to have a very good offensive line. It's a matter of how good. But you still have Lane Johnson, you still have Jordan Mailata, you still have Landon Dickerson, and everybody's seems to be of no worry that Cam Jurgens is going to be a very good NFL center.
Yeah,
Not
I'm
saying he's
quickly
going to be.
getting to that point as well, just for what it's worth. Yeah.
Yeah,
When
not
I
saying
hear
he's
Jeff
going to be
Stoutland
Jason
talk like he
Kelce.
did about him, when I hear Jeff Stoutland though talk about him like he did, and he had more concern about him last year at guard, and I thought he was a good guard last year. I thought he did a
Pro
very
Bowl.
nice
He was a
job.
Pro Bowl when he
Yeah,
was out there, which is, and he held up. But Stout, as you mentioned, said he didn't know if he could play guard. He knows he can play center.
yeah.
And then we have to figure out what they're going to do at right guard, whether it's going to be Tyler Steen, Mekhi Becton, or somebody else. But overall, when you compare it to the rest of the league, There might be a couple teams, Detroit certainly in the conversation, Kansas City's always in the conversation, it seems, and a couple others for having top 5 offensive lines, but the Eagles are gonna be in that group. So, the minute those guys are relevant and those guys are on the field, it becomes way more difficult for the defense, way more difficult, in practice and in theory, obviously, down the road, for opponents. So, right now, the defense looked great in the spring and everybody's excited, but if you think about it, there's no play action, and that's one big aspect, not one, that is the biggest aspect of Kellen Moore's offense. So, you don't have those false steps from linebackers. That's been an issue with Devin White in
Right.
Tampa. He knows the running game's not coming, so he can sit back in coverage and show up his athleticism, and everybody gets excited. So it works both ways. Defense looks good in this environment because they got a bunch of young athletic players who can show off. And then if you can project down the road offensively, all of a sudden, when the offensive line is there, again, you have RPOs, you have play action, you're putting defenders in conflict, you have double moves from the receivers. All this stuff comes in the equation. The bunch formations that Kellen Moore wants to use to free up Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All this comes into the equation when the offensive line gets on the field consistently. And then I think you'll see the Eagles offense ramp up. That's not to say give them an excuse because 7-on-7 drills are still geared for the offense, and they look bad at times, the first team. And that wasn't the case with the second and third team at times. Tanner McKee probably had 4 out of 5 good practices as the third team quarterback, had one bad one. Kenny Pickett was up and down, but he made a bunch of back shoulder throws that were pretty impressive. So I don't want to downplay the lack of productivity from the first team offense. They should have done better, but maybe that's simply explained by 95% new offense, as Jalen Hurts said. So this isn't about meshing together 2 offenses. It's about Kellen Moore's completely new offense.
Yeah, and there's always so much context, Johnny Mac, and you always bring it to this show. Just everything you just said. It's basically impossible to gauge whether the defense is going to be good or whether the offense is going to be bad from these type of practices. There's offensive lines, there's plays, there's teams, there's instincts, like you said. So, and I would also add in the identity of this football team for many years now has been the lines, both on both sides of the ball, offensive and defensive line.
By design.
Yeah, by design. I mean, they build from the inside out. They've been very vocal about that. They've been very clear about that. They put a lot of stock in those positions, and they're not really a part of this. So it's tough to gauge, whether they're going to be great or not. But I will say, I agree with you on the offense. I think it's mostly to the Kellen Moore, to the 95% new. So we'll see how they come along in camp. Johnny Mac, any big winners or losers from camp for you, specifically talking about players? If I went loser, I'd have to go Nakobe Dean. I know you guys are telling me he's still going to be the guy and he's coming back from the injury. So I don't want to go declare him a loser. I'm just saying it seems like that position they're starting to settle in with Devin White and Zach Baum, which could spell trouble for Nakobe Dean. Maybe not, but seems like that could be a possibility. And for a winner, I'd go Devin White on the flip side at linebacker, or even Mekhi Becton playing some guard. I didn't expect him to play guard. He could be a guy that maybe if he plays guard could get a contract here, but those are just 2 off the top of my head. Who do you have?
Loser, I'm going to go off the radar a little bit and say Matt Hennessy, because I thought he had a chance to push Tyler Steen potentially for the starting right guard spot. And I thought it was interesting right away. He was getting the second team reps at right guard instead of playing backup center, because he would also be the interior backup in theory at center on game day. And then all of a sudden they're playing, as you mentioned, Mekhi Becton at guard when Landon Dickerson is excused. Now, other side, and Mekhi himself said he's a natural left tackle. And he was asked, what's more difficult, moving from left tackle to left guard or moving from left tackle to right tackle, which he played last year with the Jets quite a bit. And he said moving sides was more difficult for him. So I can't just pluck him in at right guard because he's not nearly as comfortable on that side of the football. So I would say Matt, sort of off the radar. I don't think I with Nakobe. He said they just put him back in the lineup. I got to wait on that. You may be right, but he's not. He's just coming off a very serious lip spine surgery. They're mixing him in. They're sticking his toes in the water, so to speak. If it shows up, because he's going to be fully cleared by July, late July in training camp. If they show up and it's still Devin White and Zach Bond as the starting linebackers, I'll start to entertain that more. But until that happens, I'm going to default to Nakobe, so I can't go there. And as far as winners, you can pick any of the young cornerbacks. I mean,
Yeah, that's
Rodgers, Ringo, Mitchell, Cooper, DeJean, they were all pretty impressive in their first sort of bout of NFL action. And they all look good. With all that context I added in, remember, no offensive line. They're playing covers. They're jumping routes. They're comfortable. They're practicing technique. And I think, Big's trying to build up some confidence as well. So I think Big Fangio was enjoying that. Said, balls to the wall. You don't got to worry about the run game. Just go jump routes and maybe get some confidence for these younger players. I think that factored into it as well.
Yeah, my loser for Nakobe Dean honestly probably had less to do with Nakobe Dean and more to do with, is there a chance he gets Wally pipped where, you're riding Pine so much, eventually the team has to look in another
there's a
direction.
possibility. There's a possibility.
Zach Bond is stepping up. It's going to be hard to take a guy off the field who's producing. Now, let's see if he actually does produce. But my loser would have to do more with that probably than
Wally Pipp exists if people know who
does.
that is. But yeah,
the only reason I know who that is because of you, Johnny Mac. I'm from producing the show for years. I know
everybody should know. Well, look up Wally Pipp. If everybody doesn't know the story, you should know it. Pipp. But he was the Yankees' first baseman before Lou Gehrig. He got hurt, and then bang, 2000, however many games later. So it happens, but generally people default to the starter. And the Eagles love Nakobe Dean's football IQ. And I really think they want him to be the middle linebacker because of his instincts and his ability to call the defense. And they want him to be the green dot. And I've got no indication that's not the case anymore. Maybe he can't handle it physically. That's a possibility. Maybe they can't trust him to stay on the field. That's a possibility. But until I see it, and he's cleared and they're going in a different direction, I'm not going to believe it until then.
Fair enough, Johnny Mac. Let's get to our first break. We'll have Jeff Kerr coming up. It'll be good to talk to Jeff Kerr, see what his perspective is, add some insight to the conversation. I have some great topics for hour number 2, so I'm excited for hour number 2. But coming up next, Jeff Kerr joins us on Bird 365. Stay tuned, everybody.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.